Okay, so I kind of want to go ahead and get back into our coverage over Superman Triangle era. Now, just in case you're now just joining our coverage over this era, let me explain what this was all about in the 1990s. You see, when it came to DC Comics, they had this idea of trying to make sure that all the different Superman titles at that time were connected to one another. Now, you had three different titles in the 1990s when it came to Superman. You had Superman, you had Action Comics, and you also had the Adventures of Superman as well. But again, for DC, they kind of want to make sure that all three books were connected to one another, but also kind of tell this massive storyline that would last for an entire decade. But it also kind of give the writers some breathing room when it came to the writers trying their best to work on other characters around Superman, like for example, Lois Lane or Perry White or Jimmy Olsen. So it was kind of cool to see in the 1990s. And matter of fact, right now, you have DC going out of their way to make omnibuses for all these different books that came out in the Triangle era. And so honestly, it's kind of cool for new fans to have the opportunity to go back and read those old comics once again. Now, for today's video, we're going to cover part 2 and 3 of the Triangle era. And the reason why, because both issues are technically one-shots. They're kind of short stories, and I kind of feel like it'd be a good idea to go ahead and take both books and combine them together into one video. And so that kind of leads us into the Adventures of Superman, issue number 441. Now, with this issue alone, we do pick up with Superman heading over to Smallville, heading over to a hospital. Now, once he does arrive, he does change into Clark Kent, and he does ask the front desk, like, hey, where can I find the room that belongs to a patient here named Scott Brubaker? Now, you do have the two ladies at the front desk tell Clark where to go. But the problem is that once you have Clark walk away, we do learn that these two ladies, they know Clark very well for two different reasons. The first is that, well, he works at the Daily Planet, but also because there was a night, an incident happened on one particular night 10 years ago, and that accident involved Clark Kent, but also involved two other people, but Scott Person as well. But while you have Clark walking his way over to the hospital room, we do get a flashback. Now, with this flashback, it's kind of establishing how Clark was able to become friends with the Scott Person. And we do learn that 10 years ago, when you had Clark playing football for his high school, he was the best player on the team. Now, we have to remember that for Clark Kent in this point in time in DC Comics or post-crisis, he didn't learn about his powers until after a big game playing football, where his father told him the truth. But either way, for Clark, back then, he had no idea he had powers. And so for him, he was the best player on the team. But he allowed Scott to tackle him to make Scott look good. And so because of that, it allowed Scott and Clark to build that friendship with one another. But getting back over to the present day, once you have Scott walk into the room, the parents of Scott are trying to figure out why in the world Clark is there. But we do also learn that for Scott, he's in a coma. So currently he's on life support, but apparently they might pull the plug on him. And that is one of the saddest things to do as a parent, to watch your child die. But for the parents of Scott, they're kind of wondering like, hey, who are you and why are you here? Now, they do recognize it is Clark Kent. They also know that Clark works for the Daily Planet. And they're kind of like, are you here for a story? But you have Clark say no. That really Clark is here because there is this connection between him and also Scott. But he also tells Scott's parents, like, hey, listen, me and Scott weren't that close. Like, we're friends, but we weren't best friends. But like I said, there was this connection. And so that kind of leads into a flashback where we kind of learn that back in the past 10 years ago at Smallville High, you had two different groups of kids who went to that school, where you had one group be all the kids who lived inside the city, while the other group was all the kids who lived on farms outside of the city. And the two groups were not really able to get along with one another. But the thing was, Clark and Scott, they were different. They were able to build a bond with one another, no matter what. But as we jump back over to the present day, you didn't have the parents of Scott kind of tell us what happened to Scott, that what put him in a coma. And apparently 10 years ago, there was this high school party. While you had Scott parents out celebrating, Scott threw a party and there was alcohol. And unfortunately, he drank some and decided to go out driving that night. And of course, it led into him being put in a coma when he got into an accident. But the question is right now, how did Clark and his two other friends get involved when it comes to, well, Scott? And this leads into the flashback to kind of tell us what exactly went down that night on New Year's Eve 10 years ago. And at the starting point of the flashback is really more of us picking up with Clark Kent, Lana, and also Pete heading over to the party that Scott was throwing. Now, when it came to the party, like I said, there was liquor. And at first, our farmer characters, they were trying their best not to drink liquor, more like sodas and water. But of course, peer pressure. And unfortunately, they begin to drink. Now, for Clark Kent, he does not get drunk. But let's not forget that Clark does not know about his true origin yet. So he has no idea why the liquor is not affecting him. But for Pete, oh yeah, he gets completely drunk. But Clark also realized that he's been out for too long and now it's time for them to go back home. And so, of course, you have Scott offered to give them a ride home, even though Scott had been drinking the entire night. And so that kind of leads into the whole idea of Scott trying his best to get Clark, Pete, and also Lana back home to their farms. But the problem is that for Scott, he continues to drink while he is driving. And so, of course, it leads into an accident. Now, once it does happen, Clark gets out of the vehicle, but Clark realizes that he is perfectly okay. But again, he has no idea why. But you do have Clark go out of his way to pull out Pete, to pull out Lana. But unfortunately, he was unable to get Scott in time. Now, Scott did live, but Scott fell into a coma. And so as we jump back over to the present day, is Clark saying like, if I was just only able to stop Scott from getting into that car, then most likely he would not be in a coma right now. But it's Scott's parents saying like, Clark, you couldn't do anything at all. Like it was Scott who had decided to drink. It was Scott who had decided to get inside that vehicle and drive and of course cause an accident. Like Clark, you did nothing wrong. You did try your best to stop him. But unfortunately, you were not able to. And matter of fact, for Clark, the problem is that he now knows his true origin. He knows that he is Kryptonian. And so for him, it's kind of like, what if I had used my abilities back then to save the life of Scott? Because again, they're going to turn off his life support very soon. Now, we do get another flashback, and really, it's more the idea of seeing the Kents being very upset with Clark because 1, he went out partying, 2, drinking, and 3, drinking and driving, even though he was not the one driving. Now, when it came to the Kents, we have to remember, they kind of got the idea that Clark is not from Earth, that he could be an alien. So once you have Clark tell his parents like, yeah, what's also weird that I came out of that accident perfectly okay, and I have no idea why. I must have some kind of guardian angel. And so the ending of this book is really more of Clark telling us like that one single moment kind of taught him a very valuable lesson that he continues to live by even in the present day. The whole idea of living life the right way by doing the right things. And so he kind of feels like if he had the ability to do the right thing 10 years ago, then most likely when it comes to Scott, he would not be in a coma at the moment. And you do have the parents tell Clark once again like, hey, listen, you may hate yourself and you may beg for forgiveness. I can tell you right now, Scott, he had already forgiven you many years ago. And so, of course, they do pull off his life support. And you have Clark fly away as Superman, but also going out of his way to make sure another couple does not get into an accident because, well, the husband had been drinking and thought it would be a good idea to drive. But now we jump over to Action Comics issue number 661. And when we do, we're picking up with the whole idea of Jimmy Olsen heading over to the airport to drop off another character known as Lucy. Now, Lucy is not really important for today's storyline, but right after you had Jimmy say goodbye to Lucy, you do have Jimmy run into another character, and that would be Woozie Winks. Now, when it comes to Woozie, he is very important because he is the partner to Plastic Man. You see, in the post-crisis era, they first appeared in Secret Origins issue number 30. Now, when it comes to Plastic Man, he wanted to commit suicide, but you have Woozie say, hey, listen, don't do that. Why not go out of your way and use your newfound powers to fight against bad people? And just like that, Plastic Man did. He became a hero with Woozie being his somewhat partner. Now, for Plastic Man and also Woozie, they had to sneak on a plane by having Woozie be hidden inside a suitcase while you have Plastic Man pretend to be a suitcase to get a free ride over to Metropolis on a plane. The problem is that right after you had Jimmy help Woozie get out of the suitcase, you had a thief grab Plastic Man because that thief believed that Plastic Man was, well, a suitcase. But you do have Plastic Man being able to stop the thief and hand the thief over to, well, the police. And with all that being said and done, you have Woozie tell Plastic Man how Jimmy has supposedly helped him out. With that being said, you then have Plastic Man realize that maybe, just maybe, Jimmy could possibly help them. But you do have all three characters leave, and you then have Jimmy ask Plastic Man and also Woozie like, hey, why in the world are you guys here in Metropolis? And so you have Plastic Man and Woozie tell Jimmy like, hey, back at our home office, we were confronted by a character known as Philo. Now, when it came to Philo, he got shot multiple times by a gang because he overheard what they had going on in Metropolis. So you had Philo head over to Plastic Man, gave him some money to take care of this job, to go over to Metropolis to stop this supposed gang from doing something bad in Metropolis. Now, the only clues they have right now is TB and a bunch of numbers like P018811. So that is the only two clues they have at the moment. But now we have to jump over to Superman. You see, for Superman, while flying in the north part of Metropolis, he does fly over a few members of Intergang. Now, Intergang is this nationwide criminal organization in DC Comics, but their main headquarters is in Metropolis. Now, here's the thing, because they're in the weapons trade, but also, like, sometimes those weapons could come from Apocalypse. But either way, for Clark, he was just flying by, and he realized at first they need some help. But while trying to help them, they believed that he was there to bust them. And so, of course, you do have these different members of Intergang try their best to take down Superman, but it's Superman, so he was able to easily defeat them. But after doing that, he tries his best to hack into the computer that's in some kind of aircraft. But then out of nowhere, the aircraft blows up. But now we jump over to the base of Intergang. Now, when we do, we pick up with their actual boss, and that will be Mannheim. Now, when it comes to Mannheim, he's also with his, love interest, better known as Lilani. Now, for Lilani, she's kind of freaking out because she's wondering if Superman was able to access any kind of important data on that computer that he was trying to access before the aircraft had blown up. Now, you have Mannheim tell Lilani that he should have not been able to get anything at all. But of course, for Clark Kent, he was able to get one single piece of information, TB. And TB is very important because Plastic Man is also wondering what TB is all about. But now we have to jump back over to Jimmy, Plastic Man and also Woozie. Now for Jimmy, he was distracted by Plastic Man stretching out, and so for Jimmy, he had on accident drove over to Suicide Slum. Now Suicide Slum is known as like the rough area of Metropolis, but either way, when they do arrive, you do have Jimmy be confronted by Bibbo. Now remember, when it came to the Triangle Era, the whole idea of the era was to make sure all these different books are connected to one another, but also give other characters around Clark Kent time to shine. And so in our last video, we had talked about the idea of Bibbo finding a lottery ticket. And the thing is, he won. And so with a portion of that money he won, he bought a bar down in Suicide Slum. Now for Jimmy, he kind of realized there is a possibility that Bibbo might know more about this whole TB person. And so now we jump over to the Daily Planet. Now, when we do, we're picking up with Clark Kent just working at the Daily Planet. But while doing that, you then have Clark Kent get a phone call from Jimmy. And you have Jimmy tell Clark that he's with Plastic Man and also Woozie, but also that they're trying their best to investigate this whole TB thing. And so for Clark, because he was in the computers of Intergang and he also found something about TB as well, he's kind of like, wait a second, what in the world is Jimmy up to? And so you have Clark leave the Daily Planet, change Superman to go meet up with Jimmy at Bibbo's bar. Except by the time you have Superman arrive at the bar, unfortunately, Plastic Man and Woozie had already left. And the reason why, because Bibbo had told Plastic Man that basically the numbers he have, they belong to a harbor registration. And so you had Clark realize he needs to head over to a nearby harbor. And so this kind of leads into the ending of the storyline, because you do have Superman arrive at the harbor, except when he does, he kind of realizes that Plastic Man is fighting against a character known as Time Bomb. Now, when it comes to Time Bomb, he's the whole idea of TB. You see, for Time Bomb, while traveling over to Metropolis, he wanted to make sure that no one knew it was him traveling over to Metropolis, and gave himself a different code name, TB. With that being said, when it comes to Time Bomb, this is his first appearance ever in DC Comics. Unfortunately, he only appears twice in DC Comics, and this is one of those 2 times. Now for Time Bomb, he has the ability to blow up different parts of his body. Now, after doing that, he's then able to reform the missing parts of his body. And you do have Superman and Plastic Man being able to work together to easily defeat Time Bomb. But after doing that, we then jump back over to the airport. And the last page of the book is really more of us seeing Jimmy Olsen dropping off Plastic Man and Woozie at the airport. But while doing that, we see Leilani, the girlfriend of Mannheim, who is the leader of Intergang, meeting up with another woman known as Tiny Bubbles. And that's really it for today's storyline. So with that being said, guys, please leave me a like down below and subscribe. But guys, see y'all next time. Later.